Welcome back to the Power Hour. Thank you for joining us. It is 8 minutes after the hour. Joining us today is Dr. John Hall. He is a physician, medical doctor in San Antonio. He's the author of a book called A New Breed, Satellite Terrorism in America. He is a board-certified diplomat of the American Board of Anesthesiology and a member of the American Academy of Pain Medicine. He's also a member of the Mind Science Foundation, dedicated to the study of human consciousness. He sits on the medical committee of the human rights organization Freedom from Covert Harassment and Surveillance. We're going to talk about his book, A New Breed, today, which is based on true life events and some things you're not going to want to hear, I can assure you right now. Thank you so very much, Dr. John Hall, for joining us in the Power Hour today.
Hey, Joyce, how are you this morning?
Well, I'm fine now, but I have a feeling I'm going to be a little disturbed once we get into this subject today.
Yeah, it's a scary topic and one that's hard to believe, and unfortunately one that's affecting, we estimate probably upwards of 300,000 people here and many more globally, at least from my contacts. Okay,
when you say affects 300,000 people, what affects these 300,000 people?
Well, the topic that the book is about actually has been coined as electronic harassment. At least, my theory is that it's a form of experimentation using electromagnetic weaponry that, according to my sources, much of it's satellite-based. It also could be coming from HAARP or from cell towers, or it's probably multifactorial, but in a nutshell, it's people that are suffering from a form of stalking called organized stalking, that notice themselves being followed around everywhere they go by strangers, not stalking by a loved one or disgruntled, employees or something, but people unknown to you. That also ends up the victim suffering from effects of directed energy electromagnetic weapons, having voices put into their head harass them or in their surroundings, directed energy attacks causing the body to twitch, to burn, eye burning, involuntary motion, electronic disturbances in the home and in the vehicle. Pretty well inundated with this type of activity, and at least in almost all of the victims that I've spoken to, and I've spoken to several thousand, are people that have had no history of mental illness and oftentimes no history of any significant drug use. So, this is technology that's been worked on since the late 50s, early 60s.
Okay, well, what you're talking about here, if a person talks about this or says they experience this is the kind of thing, though, that will get you locked up and put on antipsychotic drugs and develop tardive dyskinesia and inability to walk after a few years.
Oh, yeah. And the technology was specifically created to mimic the symptoms of delusional disorder or paranoid schizophrenia. And that ultimately is, I think, somewhat the goal of the experimentation is to see how quick you can get someone to complain of this to their loved ones or to their employer who's not going to understand it, not have heard about it. And even as a physician, a decade ago, if somebody had came to me and told me, I'm being followed and I'm hearing voices, I probably would have referred them to a psychiatrist too. Until gaining a better understanding of it and having it happen to someone that was close to me, and actually doing a little checking and calling in some favors with some people that are friends of mine that work for the government to verify what the technology is capable of. Looking into the history of mind control and the attempts at remotely controlling the human organism that was MKUltra in the 60s and 70s, it's pretty easy to see where the technology was heading and where their goals of getting it to were. But yeah, it's designed, psychiatrists were involved in the early stages of this, so it's designed to mimic mental illness, so when you do go in and complain about it, your community psychiatrist you're sent to may absolutely know nothing about it, but even if you put information in front of them that you've gotten from your own research, they're still more interested in fitting you within the DSM-4 and getting you on medication than actually looking into the problem.
Well, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the fact that you're willing to talk about this, and I'm sure there are lots of people out there that are just relieved as all get out to know that there is a medical doctor in San Antonio who's actually saying yes and giving credence to what they've been suffering from for a long time. Now, since I don't suffer from it, and I find this kind of unbelievable, which a lot of people do, you know, I kind of hope that what you're saying might explain some things like the Aurora shooter, which looked like an absolute zombie when he came before the court system, and saying, you know, people saying things like, I didn't do it, when in reality, you know, and I've run into this from many Gulf War veterans that I've worked with who have been accused of committing a crime who have no remembrance of it whatsoever. So let's, if we could, you know, in talking about this mind control that exists. We know the government did a lot of research in mind control. We knew there were Manchurian candidates. Is this something used for evil that we would be seeing on a daily basis? Or is this something just, you know, that's a rarity of people that are holed up in their apartments thinking people are stalking them that we never see?
Well, you know, first off, you know, we need to clarify that, you know, mental illness does exist, and it's sometimes difficult to determine who may be really mentally ill and who may be a victim. We're still working on ways to discriminate between the two.
Wow.
But yeah, for the most part, I think this is being used. Well, I know for a fact it's being used nationwide. And you're right. It started with learning how to create Manchurian candidates. And if you look back in the early studies with MK Ultra, you know, they used torture, they used drugs, they used played tapes, you know, underneath your pillow 24/7, you know, to do it. It was hands-on at that time. Well, you know, as technology advanced and we got a better understanding of electromagnetic energy and directed energy and, you know, the effects of ELF waves on the temporal lobes of the brain, well, essentially, you know, that gave them the ability to take the guinea pig out of the lab and make the home the lab, or work, or your car, or wherever you happen to be the lab. No longer did you have to take somebody to a hospital and repeatedly shock them with electroconvulsive therapy and have them on 3 or 4 different drugs to wipe the slate clean and create a new personality. You know, as it turns out, the brain's very sensitive to electromagnetic energy, specifically ELF waves, and you can do most of that remotely now. So, you know, and you're right, like the Aurora shooter, you know, all these people you see doing these shootings and then claiming that they have no memory of it. Well, that's exactly the way, you know, creating a Manchurian candidate works. You know, you have a remote trigger. You change to an altered state of mentality. You have them do whatever you want them to do. And then after they've done the deed, you convert them back to their normal personality with a remote trigger. And the two personalities won't have any recollection of each other. So, you know, a good example was the individual that shot the congresswoman there in Arizona. You know, he had apparently been on several websites mentioning that he felt like someone was controlling his mind or putting thoughts in his head for some time before that happened. And I've even had a high-ranking officer from Fort Bragg who had to order my book from a computer off-site because my book's it's not allowed to be ordered off of DoD computers, you know, or off of NASA computers, by the way, as a friend of mine from NASA told me. But because it's been red listed. But this high-ranking officer from Fort Bragg had a soldier that was a serial rapist. They had caught him breaking in and raping several women. Not really the guy, his officer knew him well. This wasn't in his personality profile to do this, and has no recollection of doing it. And, you know, just coincidentally, Fort Bragg is where the 5th POG is, the Psychological Operations Group as well. And he was wondering if this could possibly be some type of experimentation or a Manchurian candidate control. So, I mean, it's happening worldwide, certainly nationwide, and in all walks of life.
You know, I had a friend who was in Washington State, and he was a ranger. He had come to me he was trying to find help for his Gulf War illness, and he was afraid he was going to kill somebody. And he had this thought over and over again that he was going to kill somebody. So they denied him support, denied him help at the VA hospital. He moved to Florida, and he happened to be involved with someone down there who I happen to know. And one day, he killed his fiancée and her children. Just killed them. And then he picked up the phone and he called 911 and said, everybody in my house is dead. Is it possible that I could have done it? You know, that's not exactly the MO of a killer, you know. And I've had several of these people that I've visited in prison when their attorneys are trying to find out what they were exposed to, what happened to them during the Gulf War. And this is a story I'm hearing over and over again of they keep knowing they're going to kill somebody or told to kill somebody. And then the VA says, sorry, you know, we can see you in 9 months. And then they go and kill somebody, and everybody goes, wow, they killed somebody. I wonder why. But, I mean, what is going on? There's got to be something. And, by the way, we see two things. I've been looking at all the medical records, and we see two things. They have SSRI drugs, and they have statin drugs in common. Those two things I have seen corollaries. I'm just wondering, you know, what is going on with these people, and why do we have so much of the murder in the military of their families?
Well, my personal belief on the SSRIs, the statins, I know statins will cause some memory loss, usually not enough to be complete memory loss, but the SSRIs, my gut feeling is that they probably make the brain more sensitive to electromagnetic control, and they've been relatively a failure in treating PTSD, you know, for some time now. I mean, the suicide rates among the guys coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq are high as they've ever been, despite treatment. You know, that it kind of all fosters together into one big control mechanism. And if they found that the brain is more sensitive to electromagnetic control on SSRIs, then that may be the reason that, you know, the DSM-5, which is soon to be released, is actually providing for at-risk mental illness disorders, where they have basically the permission to put you on medications, because you may
okay, we got to go to this break. We got a 4-minute break. We'll be right here for joining us. It is 24 minutes after the hour. We're talking to Dr. John Hall. He is a physician in San Antonio, and he is addressing the issue of electronic harassment. You think it doesn't occur? Well, keep listening. He's had personal experience, and he has written a book called A New Breed, and you can get it at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble. It is Satellite Terrorism in America, and we'll get more to why he believes it exists. But, you know, you were talking about ECT therapy or electroconvulsive therapy, and how, you know, people do these kinds of things and they carry out orders because they're told to do it. I used to be director of nursing in a hospital right there along 410. It used to be called Colonial Hills. And I was, my job as the director of nursing was to give ECT therapy, Dr. Hall. And I gave it thinking, like they told me, you're the only one that can save these people. That's the only help they have left, is to, you know, zap their brain into oblivion and take away their memory and then, you know, let them work it back again. I believed in that. I did that kind of stuff. So I can see how you are told that's your job to do it and you carry it out, which is scary. So now I'm trying to undo some of the karma that I've created in the past. But it's scary how people will zap somebody's brain and not think a thing about it. And I have to look at myself first.
Well, and that's right. And if from my experience with the group that we identified in San Antonio that has access to this technology, there was a curve to their brutality. I mean, it was real obvious, you know, when this first started in San Antonio, at least with the victim that I wrote about. It started off with mainly stalking, which is how it starts with every victim. And the electronic harassment was, for the most part, you know, just putting voices around her, you know, or in her head that frequency specific that only she could hear. It was very obvious she was holding complete conversations with somebody that out loud, her speaking out loud, of course, with no one else being able to hear who she was talking to. And this is a little bit different from what schizophrenics will describe, which is multiple voices, you know, like hearing voices out of a subway or the voice of an angel or the voice of God. These are people that are basically telling you where you are, you know, describing your surroundings to you, so you're very well informed that you're under some form of surveillance. And it started with just some minor twitching, and I mean, the brutality was really relatively low. But, you know, as we've shown with, you know, some very ancient experiments, that people become tolerant of torturing someone else pretty quickly. And, once they saw, well, if this doesn't hurt too bad, let's take it to the next level and see if this hurts a little worse. Until finally it erupted into basically drugging her with Rohypnol, breaking in, or controlling her to drink where they put the date rape drug, breaking in, and then sexually assaulting her. And you'll see that with all of the victims, that oftentimes, these victims will say, well, it started off with just voices and it wasn't too bad, and even some of the perpetrators were humorous, or, some of the people will tell me, well, I kind of thought maybe that I was hearing voices of some deity or something, until they started asking me to do sinister things or attacking me or berating me. And then they come to the conclusion real quick that they're under some form of harassment, that there's nothing kind or nice about it. So, you do see them ramp it up, as time goes on, and they become more comfortable with torturing another human being.
Okay, I want you to, if you would please, define what you mean by stalking, define gang stalking, and walk us through the day in the life of a person that is actually being stalked by one of these mechanisms. So, first of all, what is stalking?
Okay, well, I'll kind of give you the run to what we see in a nutshell. Gang stalking is a term that I really have never used in my book. I'll refer to it as organized stalking. Okay. Gang stalking was an early term used for being stalked by a group of individuals unknown to you. That it's 24/7 stalking. They're in your driveway or out front of your house at night. They're around your work. They're around you at the store, following you everywhere you go 24/7. And the reason I don't like the term gang stalking is it implies that it's guys in black jackets, Bloods or Crips or something like that, and it's not that. These are usually former FBI or private investigators that are well trained in doing this, and it's done methodically. So they've read a manual to do it, because it's done the same way nationwide in every major city. It starts with the individual being stalked. Sometimes they notice the stalking, sometimes they don't. The stalking, oftentimes several months into it, will cease. You'll see the victim begin to get severe tinnitus, ringing in the ears, which within the victim population is about 300% above tinnitus in the normal population.
Okay, we got another break we got to go to. I'm sorry. Dr. John Hall, a physician who has become involved in this subject because of a situation that he was involved with a person who was being gang stalked. And now, was that your first introduction to this, Dr. Hall, or were you somehow studying this subject beforehand?
I had heard a little bit about it beforehand, mainly through its legitimate use as a weapon of war. But and then when it started happening to this person that I wrote about, I made some phone calls and said, has this technology been commercialized where anybody has access to it? And was told by a current CIA agent that no, it's still a weapon of war for use abroad only. And I said, well, I've got a victim here in San Antonio who's being victimized by it. And the main reason for writing the whole story, as crazy as it sounds, I thought, after doing some Google searches and talking to people, and the only person who was really fighting it at that time, and this would have been a decade ago, was Eleanor White with her website, which focused at that time mostly on the stalking aspect of it. So I thought, what, as crazy as it sounds, I'm going to write this whole story in a book and get it out there. If it validates some of these people's concerns and their victimization, even one or two people, it's worth writing it. And even better yet, if it gets some family members or loved ones of a victim to come around and believe them what's going on with their family member, even better. And the book did succeed at that. After doing several radio shows, I did get a lot of calls from parents and from loved ones saying, what, my son or my daughter or my wife has complained about this for years. We've been in and out of psychiatrist offices. None of the meds help. It doesn't stop it. They're still complaining of it, and now we know what it is. So, that made publishing the book all worthwhile. Not that it wasn't published at a cost, because the only person crazier than a targeted individual or person under this kind of harassment is the doctor that believes them. So, that's had a little bit of a cost, to it itself. And I've got a second book coming out that is actually technological based and historical based, kind of tells us how we got to this point, what technology is being used, and what can be done to combat it. And there's been a pretty concerted effort by the FBI to keep that book from coming out. So hopefully, I planned on having it out 2 years ago. It's been redacted. It's been censored. I think we're about ready to actually, get what I'm being allowed to published anyway.
Interesting. Well, I cannot imagine what it must be like to be a physician fighting this element or fighting this issue and trying to justify that these people have a real problem. And I also cannot imagine being on the other end of this in the hundreds of emails that you must receive of people saying, I got that problem, now what do I do? I mean, that's got to be an amazing burden for you.
I for a while was getting hundreds of emails a day. Yeah, it slowed down. I probably get 10 or 20 new victims a day that email me, and globally. I mean, this is not a United States problem. It's every industrialized nation who has access to this technology. So, I mean, I've heard from victims from just about everywhere.
But how do you deal with this? I mean, what do you say to them? Hey, sorry to hear you got the problem. Yeah, I know it exists. I mean, what can you say to these people to ameliorate their situation?
There are some pointers you can give to people on how to deal with it. And for one, the biggest thing is, convincing them, don't try to convince people who already don't believe it, because it just makes you look more crazy and will get you parked in front of a psychiatrist even quicker. I point people toward the forums like Eleanor White's website or Freedom from Covert Surveillance and Harassment. Vent to people who already know the problem exists, and just validating someone's concerns that, no, you're not mentally ill. This is happening. We're dealing with it in the United States too with other victims. That in itself is therapeutic. And there are some other things. I mean, for the people who are being severely attacked physically with directed energy, there's some things you can do, some supplements you can take that they actually, use at Brook City base, which I'm sure you're familiar with here in San Antonio, where a lot of the directed energy research happens. I was in communication with them quite a bit until I was blacklisted there after the book came out, and got a lot of pointers on what they use to put off some of the free radical damage coming from 24/7 bombardment with electromagnetic energy that they give to their volunteers, the people who volunteer to be experimented on with this type of energy.
Wow. You said at Brooks what?
The Brooks City base. I don't know if you ever got down to the southeast side of San Antonio. Brooks Air Force Base is now called Brooks City Base.
Yeah, I was stationed there. I did not realize the name had changed. I was stationed there, and I knew there was a lot of stuff going on in one specific building over there that was really woo-woo stuff. Yeah,
and that's where the Directed Energy Directorate combined all of the Armed Services Directed Energy research there at one facility.
Interesting. Whoa, scary. All right, let's talk about how this affects someone's life. I mean, how are they able to keep a job? Are they able to eat? And by the way, I do want to give strong credit to Eleanor White. Raven, what is it? Something.net.
Raven 1.
Raven1.net, yes, Raven1.net. She's the one that's kept this issue in front of me, though I didn't believe in it at the time. It was really hard to accept it. Her having been a former engineer really got my attention when she started talking about this subject. But what can you tell these people? You said supplements may help. What can be done, and how much does this affect their life? Does it affect what they eat? Does it affect that they can go out and exercise or run in a park? Or what are their lives like?
Well, I'll tell you what actually destroys your health with this is, that we found that when you're bombarded with, electromagnetic energy 24/7, a lot of the cell phone studies that were published by cell phone companies claim that there's no damage that can happen from having constantly bombarded by electromagnetic energy. Well, if you look at the independent studies done, there's a lot of damage that happens with it, and especially when it's done 24/7, you release a lot of free radicals from cellular degradation. So what they do at Brook City Base is they use a cocktail of free radical scavengers to prevent cell death. Because what you see with bombardment with electromagnetic energy at long term is, cataracts at an early age, early aging, tissue breakdown, which you see when in the victims that are being attacked 24/7 and very severely with directed energy. You see a lot of muscle breakdown. What they use is a combination of alpha-lipoic acid, high-dose vitamin D3, and sublingual glutathione. And the three of those in combination will actually help at least allay some of the tissue damage from chronic exposure.
That's interesting. That's what Dr. Sherry Rogers recommends as her detox cocktail, which we carry at the Power Hour, and she is a guest on our program every month. But that's interesting that would be what she recommends for the listener or for people. How severely are their lives affected? Can they have children? Can they take care of those children okay? Can they function in having a job? Can they drive? My questions are just like, how do they live?
Well, it varies from victim to victim. I mean, some victims are attacked worse than others. One of the mainstays that these people use is they do want you to lose your job. Like I said, the whole goal is to get you in front of a psychiatrist and get a psychiatric diagnosis, because then they don't have to attack you. Your world spirals downward from the diagnosis itself, usually. Despite, the American Psychiatric Association's attempt to mainstream psychiatric illness, it's still not really accepted. So one of the mainstays is sleep deprivation. Most of the time the attacks are more severe all night long. That way you're kept awake by being attacked. You don't hear your alarm go off. You start either not showing up to work or showing up extremely late to work until you get, they start threatening to fire you. And then in most instances, the victims have told somebody at work about the assaults and the surveillance. So they're already kind of being watched. And, so the goal is to get them to lose their job and get a diagnosis. That way they're basically at home in the lab and can be a guinea pig 24/7 a lot easier. The victims that are not being attacked so severely usually are able to carry on and drive and keep a job. And the key is to ignore the audio communication. This works through brainwave entrainment. And once you're entrained, then the actual victimization with the directed energy attacks is a lot worse. And the entrainment is done by talking to you 24/7. And the victims that have learned to ignore the communication and not communicate back to these people, eventually they lose their entrainment of the EEG and the attacks lessen. But it's real difficult to get people to not communicate back to the voices they're hearing.
Oh, my goodness, I guess so. Let me open up the phone lines. If there's anybody out there that has experienced this, if you want to talk about it, if you think you may be a person of interest for them to harass, the phone number is 855